In today's video, I'm going to be introducing an album that never was. This is a series I'm going to be doing on this channel that focuses on albums that may have been abandoned by bands or shelved by record companies, unreleased and live material that never came out, or even just a sensible compilation. All are fair game, and today we're going to construct a Beatle album here on Pop Goes the 60s.
Sunrise doesn't last all morning.
A popular topic among Beatle fans is discussing the next album that would have come out had they not broken up. And there's some precedence for this discussion because the Beatles themselves had talked about that next album and the new formula they devised for it, which went something like this. John, Paul, and George each got 4 songs each, and Ringo could throw in a couple if he wanted. And this was basically to afford George more space on the albums because he had been writing more. Unfortunately, that album was not to be. And Beatle fans like myself cobbled together cassette tapes trying to compile a cohesive album that might have been. Well, all my mixtapes are gone now, but for this album that never was, I wanted to take it to another level and design an actual album cover and a fresh track listing to go with this album that never was. So here's what I've done. If any of you remember the old Beatles 65 album, the American album, these were always rather cheesy album covers, and not a lot of thought put into them, very commercial looking. So I had to figure out a way to come up with a photograph for the Beatles, because after late '69, I don't think those guys were ever in the same room together again. I'm not sure about that, but how to devise an album cover for 1970 when there's no photos of them together. So here's what I did. So we see this, I took this design and created this. Instead of Beatles 65, we've got Beatles 70. And let me just talk a little bit about this cover here. This photograph is a composite that I created out of several individual photos, and I think it turned out pretty well. And then I just grabbed some photos from 1969 here, the Beatles working in the studio. These are both Let It Be. This is an Abbey Road photograph. Let's have a look at the back. So this is a little bit different. I did some original design here, but it mimics what that design may have looked like. So their all new album of all new hits, Beatles 70. So let me read for you the liner notes that I wrote here. And as you may recall, these were always rather Hollywood. So here we go. With a new decade upon us, the Beatles are again at the forefront of pop music. Following their Oscar-winning film, Let It Be, the Beatles offer 14 new tracks on Beatles 70. If Let It Be was a new phase Beatles album, the record you hold in your hands is a throwback to another era where the Beatles get down to business in the studio without cameras, pretense, or hang-ups. Individually stunning and collaboratively warm, each song represents a personal statement as John, Paul, and George each present 4 songs, with Ringo chipping in 2 rollicking numbers. The group has left Beatlemania in the 1960s and is ready to give peace a chance. That's pretty Hollywood. Anyway, I thought it matched the cover and the cover design, and I just was having some fun with it. So let's look at the track listing that I chose for this album. Some of these songs, as many of you know, a lot of the songs were written while they were with the Beatles, and they were demoing them during the Let It Be Get Back sessions. So a lot of these songs the Beatles had started already working on. So let's start with song number 1 leading off the album. This is the early 1970 John Lennon single, Instant Karma. And I thought that was a very good album lead-in, energetic, rollicking, hard rock number, and with a pretty good message, typical of John Lennon in this period, in his newspaper single period. Next song, we're going to go with George's Beware of Darkness. Now this song is off of his first album, All Things Must Pass. I just love this record. And he sings it well. The instrumentation is real nice, and just a great lyric. Following up, we're going to go to a Paul song here with his powerhouse, Maybe I'm Amazed. And this is one of the great Beatles songs that never was, in my opinion, because had the Beatles played on it, it would have been instrumentally so much better. Great song. I always consider this possibly one of Paul's best songs he's ever written after the Beatles. Reason being is because Paul would tend to write about other people and characters he would create. This one's about himself. This is more of a depth that John would go to, and that's why I think it's so good. So if you can imagine, Maybe I'm Amazed crossfading into John Lennon's Love off of the Plastic Ono Band album. Here, a wonderful, heartfelt ballad that I think would follow nicely after Maybe I'm Amazed. We go over to a jaunty song by Ringo called Early 1970. This was a B-side of It Don't Come Easy, and a song, an autobiographical song of where the Beatles were at in early 1970. After that, we're going to go to the acoustic number of Paul's, Every Night. This was on his first album, McCartney, but he was playing it, and the Beatles were rehearsing it during the Let It Be Get Back sessions. And this is another one I thought would have been perfect on Let It Be. It's a shame, kind of like the Son of Two of Us. And it's a shame they weren't able to get to that one. Following Every Night is another acoustic number which closes side one, and this is Apple Scruffs by George. And I always liked this song. It was a fun song, a song that was very poppy and an ode to the people, the fans that used to hang outside the studio. And it just had a Beatle subject to it. I thought that would make a nice track for this album. So that ends side one. Let's turn it over to side two. Side two begins with Ringo, It Don't Come Easy. Now, I really enjoyed putting Ringo as a lead off to side two here. And It Don't Come Easy is another great Beatle-y song. The Beatles' early solo material still sounded very Beatle-y to me. And this is one of those songs, obviously helped out in great fashion by George Harrison, who produced and played on it, and maybe helped with a little bit of the lyrics, as we know. We go from It Don't Come Easy into Paul's Another Day. Here's another song that they were working on during the Get Back sessions, and eventually which was his first single. Kind of a mellow song, but I could see the Beatles doing this one as well. Following up Another Day, we have George's Let It Down. I am very partial to this song. There is a version that the Beatles did, an electric version during the Get Back sessions, which I wish they would have given a little more time to. And I really like that version over his solo version on All Things Must Pass. Next we have John's Hold On off the Plastic Ono Band album. This is my favorite song on that album. I know it's just a little quick ditty. It's actually one of the few positive songs on the album, which is I think why I like it, which it sounds Beatle-y to me, and which I believe it fits on this album. I can picture the Beatles doing that one. Much like the follow-up song, Paul's, That Would Be Something. This is another kind of quick knockoff I think the Beatles could have done and had fun with. And I know it was a song that George really liked. He made comments that was a song that he liked on that first McCartney album. Up next we have George's All Things Must Pass. The Beatles actually played this and rehearsed this multiple times during the Get Back sessions. And both acoustically, electrically, with I think a wah-wah pedal, and it was rehearsed extensively. I think George had left the band at one point, and then when he came back, I don't think they returned to this song, which is such a shame, because I prefer the Beatles version to the solo version on All Things Must Pass. In fact, the Beatles version, there's a particular version that is my all-time favorite bootleg unreleased Beatles song, and it is this song. So we're going to close up this album with Cold Turkey. Cold Turkey, I thought was just a great song by John, and though a little bit on the harsh side, I think it would have fit on a Beatles album, much like I Want You, She's So Heavy did on Abbey Road. And this was a song that was proposed to the Beatles, and Paul wasn't, I guess, too interested in doing it. And when John did this song, this is right around the time they had that meeting to do this next album. I think this could have been in line for a Beatles single, and maybe that's why Paul wasn't into it as much. Maybe it's not a good single for the Beatles, but certainly would have been a good Beatles song. So that is my album that never was, The Beatles 70. If you want to listen to this album, I have a Spotify playlist below, and I also have a podcast that you can tune into as well. I had so much fun putting this album together, and as I was designing that photograph on the cover, it made me excited to do other albums that never were by the Beatles. But what else could you possibly do by the Beatles? Well, you're going to be finding out here at Pop Goes the 60s.